I think over the last 2-3 years, the market's exploded, especially in 2018, where a lot of whiskeys reached record prices. Yeah, I think we're fortunate that there's quite a lot of good knowledge.
Well, Yuhun, thanks so much for having me. It's great to meet you and great to
Pleasure to have you, Shashank. Yeah.
Your amazing collection. So tell me, how did you get into whiskey? When did it start?
Back in 2016, I used to go to Tokyo a lot. And literally how I started was with one of these. So it's a Yamazaki 12, just a 5cl bottle.
Right.
And we used to just drink this after our yakitori or whatever that was. Mm-hmm. And then I realized, hey, it's not too bad. It's pretty good. And that's when I knew that there was a huge gap, or rather a huge journey that I wanted to start on and explore. Yeah.
And so from then to now, talk about your collection. How big is it, and what does it reflect? How many different regions, how many different areas?
I think when I first started, I liked a couple of distilleries, so Springbank and Port Ellen. So I do have some memorable bottles from those two distilleries. I think a lot of time, whiskey, it's the journey where you actually have memories of every single bottle you've ever collected. I think today, I used to have more bottles, so maybe 300 to 400, but I think in the last year and a half, I've kind of skinnied that down to really more essential bottles.
And did you drink the others? Did you give them to friends? Did you sell them?
Oh, I drank a lot. Yeah, I think that's the best way to learn. That's the beauty of whiskey is being able to try whiskeys from different regions, different distilleries, and then just making your own opinions and listening to what experienced people have to say.
Yeah. And so you're not buying them to keep them on a shelf, you're actually buying to drink and to taste and enjoy.
Originally when I started, everything was for drinking, and everything was like, hey guys, come over and let's have a couple drams. And then I realized after some time that the whiskeys that I bought 6 months ago or a year ago actually started going up in price. Mm-hmm. And that's where it became a bit more difficult to open up the same bottles that you did a year ago, for example. And that transcended into collecting. And
it seems like it's still a drink at the end of the day. It still needs to be appreciated by consuming it.
It is, because some of us are fortunate enough to be able to admire a bottle, but also understand how it tastes. And you kind of, nothing replaces that drinking experience. I think that's sort of the ultimate goal of a whiskey, is to drink it and enjoy it.
So I want to ask you about the market in a bit, but first I want to find out more about how you actually develop this collection. How do you curate the bottles you have? What do you look for? What's your sort of journey as a collector?
So I think at the start, when I started getting interested, I started by distillery. I started doing a lot of research online. I started talking to a lot of people. And I think it got to a point where you realize for certain distilleries, there are a number of iconic bottles for every distillery that started from the 60s, for example. From there, I started hunting the good ones. Today, a lot of bottles could be bought at the auction. Some are hardly ever appear at the auction. Some are found in bottle shops still that are just not too popular, where you can find some of the older bottles, etc.
And so talk about Singapore and Asia in general now, from what you've seen in your travels. How is this as a whiskey market, a place to try different distilleries, check out different bars, different shops? What is the market like now compared to when you started, say, collecting?
So I think it's all relative. I think back 3 years ago, we would say a glass of whiskey at $100 was really expensive, mm-hmm. And we would actually think 2-3 times before, and sometimes we might even share a glass just so that we could try certain types of whiskey. I think over the last 2-3 years, the market's exploded, especially in 2018, where a lot of whiskeys reached record prices. You'd see your $1 million Macallans last year, which never happened before. And likewise, every other, whiskey brand started to go up in multiples. So I think in Asia, because a lot of us are not too exposed, or it's a more recent thing in the last maybe 5 to 7 years. We're more used to high prices. Fast forward till today, prices have gone up to a point where for some of the older whiskeys, it's become really inaccessible, and we've got a lot of new whiskey drinkers as well, and that's also affected the prices.
So is it primarily new money that's driving these price increases, particularly from China and other parts of Asia?
I'd say it's a combination of new money, but also people getting more educated in old and rare whiskeys. People tend to look for certain types of whiskeys from the large distilleries. And I think also a large part of that is due to kind of the internet as well, with people like Serge from Whiskey Fun and websites like Whiskey Base or the Whiskey Monitor, where actual scores are published, and there's aggregations of scores. And with that in mind, a lot of newer people with money looking at scores would then buy based on scores. I know a lot of people like that. I think the sort of whiskey culture here has changed, as maybe opposed to 10, 20 years ago, where a lot of times I'd go out with you and say, hey, mate, I bought this bottle, let's finish it today. And it's just quantity and more the pleasure of the alcohol, consuming the pleasure of the alcohol. But I think these days it's more about, hey, let's try a few drams and compare them and see how they smell, how they taste, for example. So that's the big difference.
Well, I'd love to hear about your favorite bottle, or the bottle that's got the best story behind it in your view, in your collection.
I have a couple here. So, for example, that one there is a Port Ellen from bottled in the 1980, distilled in 1968.
So that bottle, is that a bottle that you've bought to drink or to invest?
I would love so much to drink it in terms of just opening and drinking. Unfortunately, as mentioned before, the prices have gone so crazy. Fortunately, though, I did manage to come across a fair in a shop that actually sold samples of that bottle. So I took the opportunity to buy a few samples up there. If you can see.
Next to it,
yeah. And we've tried it. We've tried it a couple times, and I enjoyed it. I think it was really, really good. So
what is the price of that now? Have you tracked it?
Last year in August 2018, a couple bottles sold at £50,000 hammer price. So the price of that has gone astronomically high.